Oh, we're a little bit tardy tonight, and you can blame that on Derek. Derek's taking the evening off, and he's not there to whip Dave and I into shape and keep us on the clock. Usually he's going, you got a minute left. You got 30 seconds left. It's 0. Let's start the show. And Dave and I are just sitting in the background bullshitting. Yeah, he's not here. That's what I said. I figured he could watch the show and he could jump in if he wants to, but I have a feeling he's exhausted. I mean, he's always, it's like when you went to Pebble a couple of weeks ago. I know you're not going to have time. I've done these shows. A lot of the listeners have done these shows, and just know that nothing ever works right. And you can plan to be somewhere, and you have job responsibilities, or you have the reason you're there, and you get pulled 18 directions, so you can't schedule it. And so it's nice to have you joining the show because it gives us the opportunity. I think last year during Old Car Festival, I did a 45-minute presentation on Elon Musk because that movie about Musk, or that show about Musk, came out on Netflix about this time last year.
A soliloquy.
So, well, I basically, if you guys want to go back, it's about a year ago. I can't remember what episode, but I did a 1-hour thing on Musk and basically went over where he started to where he was at a year ago. And he's interesting. He's controversial. And I mean, he's done a lot of things and he's bought a lot of things. So we'll see how it goes. I mean, I guess it's
I'd like to see that.
It's the common meme, and I think it's usually attributed to Steve Jobs, but whether or not Steve Jobs actually said it, but I also have seen it credited to Richard Branson, and that's, you hire people smarter than you, or and let them do their jobs. That way you look good in the end or something. And Musk kind of does that. He did, and
get out of the way.
Yeah, he did buy into Tesla and did oust the owners or the founders. So Tesla isn't his, but and I just saw somebody going off on that fact the other day. But we all know the story of Tesla, etc., and we'll see where it goes. I really think it needs to be bought by a manufacturer and let Elon play with Neuralink and Starlink and SpaceX.
Tesla, a division of General Motors, or they could rename it Chrysler. Chrysler's not really doing anything with that name right now.
Name it Plymouth. They could name it Dodge. They could name it Alfa Romeo.
I mean,
Stellantis isn't doing it.
Walter P. Chrysler was just such a devotee of good engineering, and I mean, like, they're the gold standard in electric vehicles. I mean, how you feel about electric vehicles is neither here nor there. But when people go, what's the gold standard? They're looking at those Teslas. And like that, you could shed the taint of, whatever its past has been and use it to buoy one of the existing big threes. Or, move it to Kenosha and name it American Motors. The revived Electro Raptor.
I don't know how American Motors would play in the world today, but it'd be very similar to kind of what Volkswagen's doing with Rivian right now. Volkswagen invested, what was it, $5 billion, and they said that was just the initial investment. At $5 billion, you're starting to get a chunk of a company, and I really could see Volkswagen acquiring the entire Rivian brand in the next few years if it goes that way, because Volkswagen needed the software and some of the engineering Rivian had in order to improve its EVs and make them less clunky in that. And Rivian is a very respectable company in my opinion. And
I saw a lot of them in California. It seemed to be the preferred, at least obviously electric car out there. I think I I think I saw more of them than I did like conventional, the beetle shaped Teslas that you see about,
Mm.
at least in these parts. It was,
Yeah.
and then of course there were more Cybertrucks per capita out there than here. But yeah, no, it's interesting the spread of vehicles. But Rivian seems to know what's going on. I didn't know Volkswagen had a stake in them, but it seems sensible, and it makes you wonder who's maneuvering by the scenes to try to get a chunk of Tesla.
And I was just kind of wondering, I always sit back and wonder because Ford used to have a whole bunch of money into Rivian. And of course they sold off their percentage a few years back. And obviously Rivian's got this hot ass electric pickup truck, and the Ford Lightning. I think it's got its place, but
would that make any flash in the pan? Sorry, bad pun. I have a weakness for this.
I mean, it isn't. Never mind. I was in Amory, Mississippi again today, and I don't understand it. They've got a General Motors Chevrolet dealership there. And a few months ago, I went by and there was a H1 Hummer, the new electric one. And I'm going, who in this town has 100 and whatever grand for one of these things? And I went by there today and they had two more. Well, the other one's gone and now they have two more. So I don't know if they're getting their allocations and trading them or if there's actually money around Amory, Mississippi. But I think the Hummer H1's a cool looking truck. It's a toy status symbol.
There's an argument somewhere that driving any interesting car is a status symbol. If we were strict functionalists, we'd take the bus or drive a beige Camry or something.
The good old appliance. I don't even know why they give you color choices on Camrys and Accords anymore, but they really don't. I think Camry and Accords do have the exciting blue color in addition to their earth tones, but we'll get into another episode on car colors in the next coming months, because the reason our cars are the colors they are is money. And kind of the reason Model Ts were all black for a period of 10 years or so.
Yeah.
Japan. So Dave, last week, what do I want to say? Jason, one of our devotee listeners, said kind of in the comments, who the heck is this Dave guy? You just kind of showed up. And I thought we would take tonight with Derek off because you're Derek's friend. And he's the one who brought up the idea of having you on the show to me. And, we sat down and had a conversation. And then we said, we'll try you for a few shows and see how you fit. And other than the horrible lag last week because of your internet connection, right now you seem much, much better. I don't know if it's don't know if it's the wires. When I podcast, everything is with a cord. I don't believe in wireless, but people do it wireless. Or if it was internet or if it was just that night, whatever, and I couldn't even get the episode really edited well. I'm still on the fence whether or not I'm going to release it in audio form. So if anybody's looking for episode 372, God, I can't believe we're 370 episodes into this. It may or may not appear. I just don't think it's not your fault, Dave. I just like to give, especially the audio listeners, value. I don't like wasting your time. I don't like making you sit through horrible audio. Derek and I talk about Tony Watley, and today his episode was good. Well, the episode came out yesterday, but the last 3 episodes he's put out, I can't even listen to. And I'm tired of coming home and re-editing somebody else's podcast so I can listen to it. So I'm sorry, Tony, but I haven't listened to your last 3 episodes because the audio was atrocious. And I'm not doing that. But going back, Jason asked who you were and that. And I thought you and I could kind of get to know each other in the car world. I mean, if you want to know my relationships just hang around 10 episodes or, if you want to know life in general, we can talk off air, but I thought we'd jump in and find out kind of where we started, when the car bug kicked in, what we've done with our lives. A lot of people know my story, but it's always nice to get a refresher because we're always getting new listeners. And I do thank all of the new listeners and everybody who's been sharing the show, because we're seeing exponential growth, triple digits. And I'm really liking the way the show's going. So Dave, what, as Spike Ferriston on Spike's Car Radio says, I'm going to kind of switch a little bit, but what was your Taproot moment? What's that first car memory that either somebody told you about or that you remember that made you a car person?
Wow. I don't know if I can pick a definitive car person moment. I could tell you my earliest car related memory, which would be inherently an old car memory, because I can remember sitting on the floor of a house that we moved away from when I was 3, and my dad was custom painting a Matchbox car for me. It was a big block Cobra, I recall now in retrospect, but I thought it looked like a 50s Corvette, and I was like, this would look a lot cooler if it was painted like your Corvette. And I don't remember his Corvette then. I remember it from later. But he did. He painted it in the same maroon color his 69 Corvette was. And I picked it up too soon and dug my fingernails into the still curing paint, and it looked like it had rolled over and burned, which is probably also says something about me in my life, even automotively. But I've come a long way since then. But that would be, I definitely was a car guy, at least at that point, in that I admired the shapes of the old ones, and I had a bunch of, I call them Matchbox, but must have been mostly Hot Wheels cars that I played with, and that collection only got bigger as I approached age 10 and beyond.
I'm going to agree with Disapproving Cat. He just popped up in the comments that maroon is an underrated car color. I'm trying to catch up on Tulsa King before the new Tulsa King comes, and after Stallone's Navigator was shot up, he sent his driver to go get another car, and now he's in a maroon Lincoln Nautilus for the last half of season 1, and I just think it's a stellar color on that. I like the Nautilus, but I mean that maroon on there, I just kind of like maroon. My dad's old 64.5 Mustang was maroon. So it's just been a color that pops up every now and then. I think I even had a maroon LeBaron at one point in time.
I totally agree on the color. I had a maroon Studebaker, that 50 Studebaker I mentioned in the past. It was sold dark blue, but somebody along the line painted it dark blue. Also, I got to say hello, everybody. I didn't have the right bar open to see all the comments, so
I do that quite often. So we've got your kind of Taproot moment there. Jump ahead a little bit and we'll go. What was the first car you owned or were really, let's go with what car were you really, first car you were really hands-on involved? If it was one of your dad's, one of your grandfather's, if it was yours, Derek's always tinkered with his parents, and we all know about his 74 GTO, and my dad didn't work on cars. So we kind of really didn't, we had some stuff, but he didn't work on anything. And I just kind of started with my first car and car stereos and went on from there as far as the hands-on stuff. But what about you? What's that first car where you got your fingers greasy and maybe dropped a few bits of blood?
Oh, that would have to be my dad's 1979 Ford F-250 four-wheel drive that we used to plow the driveway. And actually, it might have been the 74 before that, but that truck was pretty reliable till the front brakes went out. And then he parked it and put the plow on the 79, which had been his daily driver up to that point. So this would have been early to mid 1990s. I mean, he didn't replace that truck until he got like a 2003 Ford F-250. So that's how long that F-250 was our plow truck. And it was blue in the front, had a white box, and that thing was cantankerous as all get out in the cold weather as it aged. And it's where I learned to, you know, all this smog stuff made the engines really a lot more complicated to work on. And I guess he was qualified to say that because he'd been a service manager at Ford in the 70s at a dealership in northern Michigan. And, but, you know, I thought it was great fun. I learned new words. I got to hold the flashlight. I got to find him tools. I didn't do a lot of actual wrenching because, you know, when you're that age, you tend to move on the wrench instead of the wrench moving the fastener. But it was definitely formative for me. And that definitely counts as a classic truck now. I mean, in my experience, it was a used truck, and that probably informs a lot of how I view the world now, which is to say a 79 anything is still a used car, and then a 60s or earlier vehicle is a classic. And that's been reflected in my automotive choices, I think, since then. But so definitely there. And then more excitingly later on, I did do a lot of work on my own 1986 S15 Jimmy 4x4, which had been my mom's commuter forever and taught me to just loathe 80s GM tech because it just failed left and right. And the exhaust system rotted off that car every single winter. And you had to shift it into 4-wheel drive at Thanksgiving so that by the time the first snow fell, it would be in 4-wheel drive because the vacuum system took that long to catch up. And then you'd shift it back out about Easter, and hopefully that wasn't too soon and you didn't get a late winter squall, because then you'd be back in 2-wheel drive. And of course, because I always tempted fate, was like, I can drive this around in 2-wheel drive and squeeze a couple more miles per gallon, or probably in my mind back then, a little more acceleration out of this 2.8 liter V6. And it didn't really work out, but I learned how to drive rear wheel drive in the snow very well. And it's probably, you know, we clashed about whether front wheel drive is good or not. And I thought front wheel drive takes all of the joy that I knew out of winter driving and makes it too easy. Neil McClellan mentioned Bluey, which was my next car, which was like a 93 Escort and had nice tall skinny tires on it. So it was really like almost boring to drive that Escort in the snow. In fact, I seem to recall my one roommate getting his Z24 Cavalier hopelessly stuck in the driveway and me just motoring through the same snow because his had tires that were much wider than my Escort had.
Oh boy, I can go off a whole bunch of little things. My dad's first snowplow was a 79 Dodge that I think finally died at about 500,000 miles with its second owner. It was a company vehicle, and then one of his ex-employees ended up purchasing it off of him and made a Dodge Ram short bed plow truck into a dually at some point. It just, you know, did that, and then, you know, he had his 94 Ram snow plow, and ironically he had it until the brakes went out while he was plowing his very steep driveway, and elected to drive it into a tree as opposed to the kind of very deep stream river at the end of his driveway. So that's how that truck hit its demise, and now he's gotten rid of the long driveways. He chimed in, said 1980. It might have, I'll go ahead and tell him, yeah, that was 1980. And he bought it because it snowed really bad from what I remember and what I understand. And of course, I had an 85 Escort and absolutely loved it. It was an Escort station wagon. Only sat one person because I used the rest of it as a storage unit. Had that. I had my second car was a Mazda B2000 Sundowner pickup. 5-speed.
Stripes.
Huh?
Sundowner, referring to the stripes.
Yep, it was silver with those black stripes and had the bed tie downs, which looked tacky, but were probably the most practical bed tie downs I've ever had on a pickup truck. And I probably did some things in the snow with that I shouldn't. And I'll throw in the CRX, my 85 CRX SI. I remember driving it one night in snow and ice in central Illinois. And the front tires were about as bald could be without the steel belts peeking through. And it was still getting around. And I remember having to climb a hill at about 3 miles an hour, things like that. But I guess maybe you were right. A little bit wider tires helped there. But those are my little stories to relate back to little bits of your little stories. Not exactly the same, and I'll throw in one thing Dave has, I think, been amazed about. You can talk about cars on this show and you can refer to cars. And John goes, well, I had. And guess what? I did have a Cavalier Z24, 86 Z24 hatchback. So I was even in that Cavalier. And that car had some thermostat issue, I remember. And the gas gauge. It was a digital dash and 2 lights. If it had 2 lights on, that meant empty. That didn't mean you had an eighth of a tank left. 2 lights meant empty.
Gas gauge quirks. That's my biggest automotive sin. I try to carry a gas can because I'm bad at buying cars with reliable gas gauges, and I'm bad at being over optimistic of how much is left in a tank.
Disapproving Cat says, who hasn't owned a Cavalier? I'll even say we had a commenter early, or Chris, she even had a Cavalier. So just lots of people. You're right. I think everybody's had a Cavalier for some reason.
I actually have not, but I think the Jimmy's close. It's that 80s, early 90s General Motors experience with all the plastic and the futuristic that is now dated Euro styling. Remember the paint was shot on my Jimmy too. They had problems with paint in those days.
Neil was saying digital dash was and is a terrible idea. And like I say with a lot of car tech, it was an idea that's time came too soon. In that now we'll go back to the Lincoln Nautilus, that if you get into a 2024 or 2025 Lincoln Nautilus, they now have this 48-inch panel across the front. It's a 48-inch screen that was multi-configurable. That's where the digital dashes went. You had to introduce it, and as tech gets better, you get, the things improve. Like I go Armstrong Siddeley pre-selector transmissions. They were horrible back in the day, but some racers liked it in that. And all that was the precursor to the Porsche PDK we have now. You pre-select a gear when you want it. You hit the clutch pedal in the Armstrong Siddeley. In the Porsche, you pull the paddle, and the car's already pre-selected the next gear it thought you want. It just, tech gets better.
Well, and you got to look at how that Armstrong Siddeley was compared to everything else in its time period. When synchronizers were still in their infancy and virtually nobody had, a synchronized first gear, even on a 4-speed. So, it's probably superior tech compared to that. We've just gotten better.
Well, my big familiarity with Armstrong Siddeley is I restored a Lotus Smart 10 that had the pre-selector transmission in it. And as I was researching everything about this thing, because very few people I knew anything about it, it was actually very favored by race car drivers because they could choose their next gear and they didn't ever have to worry about missing a shift. So,
it's awesome if you watch the footage of people driving them where they just stomp the clutch pedal to get it to shift. It looks considerably quicker than, nervously letting the clutch in to shift and then letting it out again.
Neil, would have that been like an 84, 85 Chrysler New Yorker? Because our Dodge 600 had the green digital dash. And I want to even say my 88 LeBaron had the green digital dash like you're talking about with the clunky big numbers, because our 87 LeBaron, it had a digital dash, but it was a little bit better. See, Neil says yes, it was an 84, 85 New Yorker. I know my mid 80s Chrysler products.
Wait, why? You got to explain that.
For some reason, I have a fetish for my father was a Chrysler guy and always bought Chryslers, except the one time that Chrysler pissed him off and then he bought some Tempos. But he just always had Chryslers. My first car then was a Omni 024, 1980 Omni 024. And while I hated it, I really have come to realize that, that was actually a pretty good car he got me. I just was a arrogant, probably semi-spoiled teenager. But yeah, I don't know. I was just around him. I liked him. I liked the lasers, the Chrysler lasers, and then later on the Plymouth lasers and the Diamond Star stuff. And I don't know. We had the 84 Caravan. We had the 84 Dodge 600 convertible. We had the 87 LeBaron convertible. It just went on and on and on. And then over the years, I've owned a lot of them. The Rampage to me was the best El Camino type vehicle, or Ranchero type vehicle. I mean, I don't know why, but I'm just familiar with them. And if I hit this $800 million lottery or something, I would have a nice collection of 80s Chryslers. Mopar or no car.
My younger brother drove a Dodge Raider. Like, it was like a D50 pickup truck, but it was like a safari styled 4-wheel drive vehicle. That thing was awesome. That was like a Mitsubishi mechanically, but with like Dodge skin. It had like an inclinometer in it, and it felt so amazing. And the muffler
it was
fell
an
off, but the cat was.
It was an SUV. It wasn't a pickup truck, right?
Yeah, right.
Yes, okay, because you said D50. The D50 was a pickup, but yeah,
that's what I said. It's the SUV version of the D50.
Oh, yeah, I'm trying to remember. It was a Mitsubishi product, but I was trying to think of what the Mitsubishi.
And I think they might have called it a Mitsubishi Raider, but his was a Dodge, and he kept the hood ornament off of it. But the muffler fell off, and it sounded like a 60s British sports car with the 6 cylinders rasping through the cat only. And I don't know, that thing was awesome. It died during Cash for Clunkers. It was very sad.
Neil and Disapproving Cat are kind of discussing 80s K cars were beautifully terrible, and Neil's agreeing with him with the digital dashes that they're beautifully terrible. I like that term, beautifully terrible. I could build a
tragic
podcast around that.
I will admit to a certain softness for looking at the wood paneled convertibles. I liked them when I was a little kid. My parents would always look at them and scoff and go, "Oh, Lee Iacocca mobiles."
That's it.
But I liked them. Montero. Oh, okay. Is that that's what the SUV was?
That's it. Yep.
But I don't want to own one. No way. No K cars for me, thank you. I basically learned to drive in a K car. It was a Dodge Spirit. That's like a descended K, right?
The Dodge Spirit RT in 1988 was one of the fastest cars sold with the 2.2 Turbo 3 engine in it. I had a friend with one of those.
This was not one of those. It had the emergency brake pedal in it, though, which is why we were still using it in, I don't know, 1998.
I can. This is why we have you probably as a third on the podcast, because now I can jump back. I learned to drive in a K car. My driver's ed car was a K car. You said you almost know. I learned to drive. And actually, it was a maroon K car going back.
The circle.
We'll do a callback. That's what my improv teacher, callbacks. The RT is a sweet car and forgotten about. Shelby Lancer. Now that's something we always forget about. I posted a picture of that on the day Carol Shelby passed away. but you're sitting here going, what the heck was a Lancer?
Yeah, no, I was completely oblivious to that era and have kind of ignored the nostalgia for it as a consequence. But I'm pretty old fashioned in my car taste.
I was going to say, let's jump back to what the show's supposed to be about, and not mid 80s Chryslers, but a little bit of you. What is your preferred generation of car? What do you like? You've alluded to the 60s, and an old car, it doesn't start until ends in the 60s. What's your preferred era and styling?
Well, my ideal era, although I have owned exactly, I don't know, one half of a car from this time period, would be 1919 to 1942, the literal interwar period. I think the 1931-ish models are about the peak in styling, and then I think 1941 is about the peak in technology, as far as like, these are very fast, very refined tractors, right? Fords have still got solid axles at both ends. Everything's got a 6-volt generator, but it's got a regulator. All the plastic is like beautiful Bakelite and not like oily PVC or whatever we put in cars today. And that's my aesthetic ideal on paper. But I've only actually owned one car from that time period, and I never even got to touch it before I had to sell it again. So mostly I have owned 1960s cars at this point, because when I was a teenager, I was also spoiled, and my parents gave me the use of our family's 68 Camaro convertible, which when I got it was a nice Power Glide 2-barrel, 273 geared cruiser, and beautiful car, kind of odd looking to most people for a first generation Camaro, because it was Palomino ivory, like an off-white color with a white top and a gold interior. And the guy who had restored it had also added green Z28 stripes to it. And as it happened, when I was in high school, somebody backed into it in the bowling alley, and the insurance company was kind enough to spring to repaint the whole thing. So it changed colors to green, and my parents gifted me a black top. And along the way, my dad was like, since we're doing this, changing the color, why don't we also, do a little hop up to it? And I was like, yeah, let's get rid of the Power Glide and put a 4-speed in it. Because I had my choice. It was like, Dad had a turbo 350 and he had a 396 out of a Chevelle. And I was a handling snob. I was like, big blocks make the car plow in the corners. Like I was going around corners that fast, right? But I like to think that I drive extremely efficiently, and so handling is important to me, even in my vintage stuff. So I was like, no, I want the 327, and I want to build it to the vaunted L79 standard. And we almost got there. The heads we used had too small of intake valves to be a true L79. And I also managed to scrounge and beg and get extremely good killer deals from friends who were excited to see a young guy doing stuff with a 68 Camaro. I got a bell housing and a flywheel, and I got a close ratio M21 out of a 69 GTO. And then that meant, well, we had to change the rear gears too. So we ended up we didn't do the gears because gear shimming was a bridge too far from my dad, who was very handy, but also knew what he didn't want to do and was more than happy to bring people in when he felt they were needed. So we put the 342s still open in the pumpkin, and I drove it around like that for a long time. And it was great. One of my fondest memories is scrounging the clutch and brake pedal out of a junk 67 in the local junkyard. I was just tickled pink to find it. I mean, that junkyard was very cool, and you never find anything like it today. A lot of 50s and 60s stuff, but still, first generation Camaro, anything in a junkyard is not happening these days. So we took those out and reconditioned them and put them up in, because it's all modular. That's the great thing about GM products in that era. It's like you wanted the 4-speed, it's virtually already there. You just got to gather the rest of the parts. So yeah, I don't remember what the original question was, but that Camaro was probably my most extremely formative automotive experience as a youth and, going into young adulthood.
Well, the original question was, kind of what era car, what excites, I guess what excites you.
Oh yeah. So I find 60s cars then very familiar, and I'm very happy to use them for a utility purpose. So I've owned two early Ford Falcons. I had a 64 Rambler. I currently have a 62 Corvair. I briefly owned a 60 Dodge pickup truck, not briefly, for several years. I could not find parts for that thing for the life of me. And I've always sworn off oddball stuff as a utility vehicle since then, because like the Corvair, I live less than an hour from Clark's Corvair Parts, which is the biggest Corvair supplier in the nation. So to me, it's a very practical car choice to own around here. Plus it's got the rear engine for the traction in the snow and all that goodness. But yeah, no, 60s is a very good sweet spot for me. And I really loved the one early 50s car I've owned. I've driven a lot of really cool stuff, and I find I really like 40s and 50s cars from a driving standpoint. They've got a lot of input. They're still a little bit quirky, but they're very refined. You can use them like a modern car. I'm more apt to run cars harder, I think, than the average classic car owner. Like when we had that 40 Buick out, it clearly wanted to drive 75 miles an hour down the interstate, and there was no traffic. So I wasn't worried about the brakes, and it handled fine. And it was on fresh tires. And I was like, I want to let this car run. But everybody's like, well, there's no overdrive. You can't just run a straight 8 that long, that hard. And I'm like, it wants to. I think it would probably survive the experience. And I also have found that when you baby a thing too much, including our late model F-250, they foul out the plugs something mad. Nobody's running hot enough plugs and a hot enough cooling system to run a car slow and granny it everywhere. No offense to anybody's grandmother.
I say they call that the old Italian tune-up. And
that's what I've taken to is getting our truck out here to a steep hill, just flooring it up the truck lanes, because otherwise it starts to run rough after a couple of days. Scares the heck out of my poor wife.
No, it's what I want to say. You're talking about that, and people go, "You can't do that. You can't do that." You don't think people did that back in 1940? If the car's capable of 75 miles an hour, somebody's running at 70 miles an hour everywhere they drove. It's traveling salesmen or whatever, people that were on the road. The cars used to do it, and they might have required more maintenance. They can't do it like a modern car, but
right. And you shouldn't do it in a 40 Chevy, because a 40 Chevy is not a 40 Buick Century. It was not built to the same standard. That's a 50 mile an hour, 55 mile an hour car, but the Buick will eat up the highway. It was too much car for the roads of 1940 on average, but isn't having a little excess like the definition of prestigious car.
Now it'd be nice. This is one of these things that I would say Derek would be a little bit more helpful on, but it's like taking, a Model A is kind of usable even in today's world. And if you re-gear it, it becomes very passable in today's world. It's still going to take forever to get up to the speed limit in that, but you could run it on a high 55 mile an hour highway and things like that. So it all depends on those little things. Like I'm sure the Chevy's geared differently than the Buick, and that's what did it go? Chevrolet, Pontiac, Buick, Cadillac. Was that the tiers that Sloan created? Or
it's Chevy, Pontiac, Oldsmobile, Buick, LaSalle, Cadillac in that era.
So,
and I've driven a 40 LaSalle, and that's a super roadable car. And now, admittedly, the one I drove was a little bit of a hot rod, because the guy who had restored it, who has since died, and I got to meet him though. He was, at the time, it was his 99th birthday. And he was a World War II vet. Interesting guy, but he had restored this car in the 70s, probably in memory of the first LaSalle he'd had right after World War II. And he used it to take his family to the Cape from Pittsfield, Massachusetts. It was a couple-hour drive. And in the 70s, it would have been interstate. So he re-geared it with later Cadillac gears that fit right in the differential. And he took out the 322 cubic inch flathead, and he put in a cosmetically identical 346 cubic inch Cadillac flathead. And so when I wrote the article, I called it Swing Era Seville because it was this smaller Cadillac looking car that had the big Cadillac engine. It was a really sweet driving car. It was, I would say, almost as nice to drive as the 40 Buick, except A, the Buick was a convertible and I'm a convertible guy. And B, the pedals on the Buick were more pleasingly shaped for my feet than the square ones on the LaSalle, which made it a little harder for me to drive with the shoes I had on. So, but no, I would own an expensive early 40s GM car in a heartbeat. But I think my ideal car overall would be something like a 28 or 29 Ford Model A, updated to about 1940 spec in most respects. You know, keep the 4-cylinder, but put in the later synchronized transmission and you know, probably I've got a set of 18-inch square wheels stashed away in the basement for someday that would bolt right on and give me 32 Ford size tires and, you know, a downdraft carburetor and, you know, basically all the stuff that you'd need to make it run with the average traffic of, you know, 1946, 47, which is essentially what guys were doing building hot rods in that time period. The difference would be is I don't necessarily feel compelled at this point in my life to pull off fenders and chop tops and whatnot. So I guess I'm entering my fogey stage, but I think it would still look pretty cool in a gow jobby kind of way.
For some reason, I'm thinking Hot Rod Lincoln now.
Yeah. That was originally written about a V12. A guy had a Zephyr V12 in a Model A, but they changed the lyric when Commander Cody recorded it to V8. And my dad told me growing up it was a 430, which is a much later engine, but very cool.
Neil asks you, Dave, what is the most reliable car in your favorite 60s era?
Oh, okay. So that's an interesting question because I could go two ways. I could say, what's the car that if I get it in fresh spec and I just drive it without touching it, what's going to go the longest? Or there's what can I keep forever and find a reliable supply of parts for, and people are going to know how to work on it, etc. And the first one is obviously, sorry.
I was going to say, I think the first one's probably what the question is because we don't want to work on our cars. We want to enjoy our cars.
Right. If you're going to treat it as disposable and drive it right into the ground, get yourself the freshest A-body Mopar from that time period, a Plymouth Valiant or a Dodge Dart, and let her rip, and it'll last a really long time. But those cars are getting increasingly hard to get parts for because they don't share pieces with anything super desirable. They're not, you know, B-body Coronets where they've got interchange with the Super B and the Plymouth Roadrunner, and they're not E-body where they've got interchange with those cars and you know, the Cudas. So it's just harder and harder to get parts for those. Whereas something like the Corvair I'm driving or the Falcon is the keep it forever car, because the Falcon, anything that's not width based, interchanges with a 64 to 66 Mustang and a lot of pieces beyond that. And they're all good upgrades to the original Falcon platform. I used to jokingly refer to every Mustang I saw as a good Falcon donor. And then the Corvairs, like I said, they've got their own separate enthusiast group that thinks of them as like America's answer to the Porsche 911 and perhaps the Baja Beetle as well. So I'm more on the Beetle side of that spectrum because I've got the knobby tires and the lamps, and I've got a roof rack to put on it and that kind of thing. But anyway, yeah, anything you can get parts for is the ideal. So yeah, 57 Chevy is probably in that group too, although it's not truly a 60s car. There were a ton of them still on the road because they had a huge afterlife on the used market back then. But yeah, okay, reliable, toughest, longest lasting. That'd be the Slant 6 Valiant. They're what the cockroaches will be driving after we're gone.
Well, I guess we just look at Cuba and we know the ones that would last with, well, you know, with Chinese motors.
Yeah, Russian bus diesels in place of the 348s and whatnot. But
you've mentioned on the show a couple of times, and I know you touched on it probably either last week or I guess briefly last week, but in your current role you say writing articles and that. Yeah, you're a journalist with Hemmings. And what do I want to say? What got you? What put? How did you become an automotive writer? Because all of us dreamt of being an automotive writer or something. Hell, that's why I do this podcast. You know, I want to be David E. Davis and Dr. Johnny Fever, which could easily be mistaken on some days. But how did you get into the writing, and what was your path to that, and what do you have a goal?
I have always been a writer, which I think sort of led me everywhere I've been. And I'm always putting my thoughts down on paper. My wife jokes that I have the list making personality because a lot of my daydreams take the form of bullet point lists. So I think the sheer fact that I'm always writing and a lot of it is about old cars is what led me where I am. And the most direct form would be, I'm friends with a guy. Okay, I got to go back, but because it's all friends. You know, that's how you got to make connections, and that's how you, like Derek was saying the other day in our side gigs one, is that some jobs you get into so you can meet people. And so I've had the luck that I've met a lot of people just because I grew up in the age of the internet. So I was on a message board, and still am, called the Ham, the hokey ass message board, which is the result of me sitting down at a computer on my first day in college and typing out jalopy and putting it into Google and running a search. And it was not even loading, but I was persistent. I was like, okay, well, jalopy's going to be up my alley. And finally I got in there, and everybody's posting about 40s and 50s style hot rods. And I was just in heaven. Right. And it's still like where most people go to talk vintage modified stuff, unless they're in a real niche where they need to talk with people who are very particularly into their subset. And through there, I heard about the Race of Gentlemen, which was this vintage car event held out on the West Coast. I forget how many years ago it started at this point. But I went in 2014 to meet my buddy from Portland out there, who was going to have his Model T in the race. And he drove me all around that weekend. It was amazing. I mean, like, it rained and I slept in a weird place. I ended up stealing a bed from a guy I hadn't met yet, but later ended up being a good friend of mine. We're all in a club together now called the Barnstormers, where we're devoted to this vintage speed idea with an emphasis on the pre-World War II era, but definitely bleeding up into the 50s quite a bit. So yeah, you could say that the Race of Gentlemen Trog is what got me here, because it was through that I met a managing editor at Hemmings who said, you know, we're really looking for a good writer. You should come work for us. And, you know, I was practicing law at the time, and I was like, you know, I was in collections and bankruptcy, and I was on the side of the people with money, but it wasn't really like, you know, heartening work. So I was like, yeah, let me take a chance on this automotive thing and see what I can get up to there. And I'm really grateful, because Hemmings was enthusiastic about taking me on, and taught me a lot about the magazine world and the old car world in general, and how people buy and sell cars, and the role of history, and all of that. And it's been a really interesting ride. And I've gotten to, like I've alluded to, drive a lot of really cool cars in the process, meet a lot of really cool people, see a lot of really cool things. So it's been wonderful. But yeah, it's if you want to get into automotive writing, write all the time. And especially if you're not looking for the financial reward, you know, you'll have less time because you have to make your money some other way. But you're more likely to get into a situation where you're refined enough that people are going, yeah, give this to us. We want to print your stuff. I think you can probably hear my extremely vocal cat on this microphone. I apologize for him.
Yeah. Well, like I say, cats are actually aliens, and you really can't do anything about it.
Oh, he's totally an alien.
Like I say, Douglas, that's the only thing Douglas Adams got wrong. It's not the mice, it's the cats. But hopefully, I mean, we covered a lot tonight, from geez, I mean, 40s era cars, 80s era Chrysler, 60s era cars. We got to know Dave a little bit better. We got a couple of stories out of me, which I'm sure we're all tired of hearing. And
well, they were new to me.
so, well, you're not supposed to say that. Dave's been listening to all 370 episodes that have come out, 71 episodes that have come out thus far.
Right, but I had amnesia. That's it. But just about podcasts. I'm sorry.
So, it's kind of like me. I listen to something and I forget it. Or I just wasn't listening. But like I was saying, I hope that got everybody a little bit more familiar with Dave. It was a great opportunity with, Derek kind of needing the night off. I'm sure he's exhausted and kicking back in his hotel room. And, I kind of even know how it is. I'll spend 6-8 nights a month in a hotel. And a lot of times when I just get done with my normal stuff, I just want to go to the hotel and don't even, click on Paramount and watch Charlie Sheen and John Cryer all night long until I fall asleep. I don't even want to think about what to watch, let alone come on and try to have an intelligent conversation for an hour in front of, a couple hundred people. So as Derek says, if you like what you hear, go tell somebody, share the show. It helps us out. Subscribe on YouTube if you really want to catch these live streams. We've been doing it now for over a year on Thursday nights, so I can promise pretty much, with the exception of Thanksgiving, which will probably be a replay or a pre-recorded show, we're usually going to live stream on Thursday nights, 9 p.m. Central. You figure out the time zone from there. And Dave, is there anything you want to close up with, or we're going to go ahead and shut it down? Or
no, just thank you all for joining us. I wish I had a better catchphrase.
Oh, we've got to work on that catchphrase thing, because Derek's got one and I got one, and if you add one, we can't do. We'll just have to rotate.
Oh no!
Shows.
I got one.
We'll let you do yours, and I won't do mine for a change.
All right. Until then, keep your motor running.
Then we are out. Talk to everybody next week, or listen to us live, or listen to us recorded on the audio coming out Monday morning.